that is a superpower you have. When I ask them to identify superpowers, people really struggle with that at first because they are like, I don't have any. Where's that coming from? So I tell them to start at the last compliment they received, because we tend, especially as women, to make light of our successes rather than share our successes. Guys are very good at that. We are not. So as we identify our successes, we build our confidence, which enables us to share our skill sets, and we do better in interviews and in jobs, in our everyday lives, or whatever.
Welcome to the Blueprint Breakers podcast. What is a blueprint breaker? If you live your life outside the typical traditional lifestyle blueprint, you are a blueprint breaker. We are here to start a conversation, to assemble resources, and to build a community. This podcast is for empowered women in midlife and beyond who are preparing for a powerful next era of life. My name is Amy A. Palmer. I am your host and facilitator for our conversations. Sit back, relax, enjoy the show. To stay connected, up to date, and to receive all of our free resources and gifts along the way, join us at community.blueprintbreakers.com.
What is your superpower? Join us in this episode as we delve into the inspiring journey of Gayle Petrillo. She's not only conquered personal adversity, but she's dedicated her career to empowering women in their professional journeys, from navigating career pivots to mastering effective resumes and interview techniques. Gayle shares invaluable insights gained from her own experiences and extensive expertise. So today in this conversation, you're going to discover how to harness your inner strength, overcome fears, and uncover your unique superpower to confidently pursue and secure your dream job. Listen in for practical strategies and heartfelt stories that will inspire you and equip you on your own path to success. Hello, Gayle. Welcome to Blueprint Breakers. So
Hi,
great to
Amy.
see you.
Hi, Amy. Thanks so much for having me as your guest. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. I'm so thrilled that you reached out. I know that we are both cool life thought leaders, and that's how we got connected. And I'm so happy that I wrote the article about podcasting last month, which triggered you to come for us to connect. So it's awesome. So nice to meet you. And I'm really, really looking forward to our conversation.
Me as well. Thank you.
As I looked into your background and what you do, the first thing that jumped out at me is that you and I have a lot in common. There's definitely parts of our path that are alike and in sync. I too come from a very deep corporate background and then pivoted, into coaching, consulting, speaking, etc. I actually have gone back and forth a couple times from corporate to entrepreneurial to corporate again, and then back again. But here I am to stay this time. So.
Yeah, I don't know to say I'm sorry or good for you. I've never gone back and never will.
Oh, good. Yeah, I get it. I'd love to hear your story and your journey and a little bit about what's gotten you to your current path.
Yeah, thank you. So my background is healthcare leadership, 30 plus years working my way up the corporate ladder. I started in a large medical center and then found my way into private practice, small medical groups, large medical groups. Ultimately, I ran a very large pathology department in a major medical center. I've also done clinical research for 10 years, 6 of that in rheumatology. And I traveled the country auditing clinical research trials before they got approved by the FDA. And that was before laptops were really little laptops, and long before Siri and directions and all of that
GPS.
Yeah, all of that. And so my laptop weighed more than I did. And we did have MapQuest, which got me lost a few times, including once in the middle of Wisconsin in cranberry bogs. Yeah, MapQuest, I came to a T in the road and MapQuest said, go straight. That was impossible. So I sat in my car for probably 3, 4, 5 minutes on this highway in the pouring rain, and dead ahead was this bar. And I thought, I'm a single woman. It was way early in single women travels for business. And I hesitated going in, and I see these red lights coming up behind me. And I thought, uh-oh, I'm going to get pulled over. And I don't know why. And this really sweet policeman pulled me over. He said, are you in trouble? And I said, sort of, I'm lost. MapQuest told me to go straight. Clearly, I can't go straight unless I wind up in the lobby of this bar. And he asked me where I was going, and I was going to another major medical center. He said, well, follow me. I'll take you. He took me 20 minutes outside of where we were. And as he got me there, he got back into my car and he said, just so you know, anytime you're here, and I will be there every 6 weeks for my job, come on in. You can use the bathroom. It's safe. My wife and I are here 3 nights a week. We'll welcome you to join our time. He was so kind. So I've had lots of experiences like that. And one of the reasons I share that, Amy, is actually that started my path to independence, self-confidence, because for the very first time, I had to travel alone on an airplane, rent a car, drive into no man's land, stay in a hotel by myself, eat by myself. I had never done any of those things. And so, sure, I had gotten opportunities to go to conferences, but you always went with 1 or 2 colleagues. You always met people there that you had met in prior conferences and all of that. So how I wound up coaching. So we live in Tucson, Arizona, and I'll say 12 or so years ago, we were visiting friends in Phoenix, and Sunday morning, my husband and this woman's husband were in the kitchen cooking, and she and I were reading the Sunday paper. And I was flipping through the paper, and I went to the want ads, not for any specific reason, but that's how you found jobs back then. And I wasn't looking, but I was curious. And there was this job that read just like my resume, and it was for Banner Health, which is a very large, almost national organization. And I looked at my husband and our friends, and they were like, oh, are you going to apply? And I said, well, I should, but it's in Phoenix. We don't want to move. So long story short, I applied. I got the job. They did a national search with a firm out of Atlanta. I landed this phenomenal job. We got a condo up there. And again, that was now my next stage of a little bit of independence and self-confidence, because my husband was in Tucson in the house most of the week, and I was up in Phoenix in a condo most of the week. And from there, I was recruited to be the executive director of a fairly large multi-specialty practice, again in Phoenix. And so we continued that separation, if you will, for 5 years. It's a long, long time. Yeah. Al and I just celebrated our 44th wedding anniversary. So we've been together about 46 years. And we had never been apart like that. So it was a challenge. It was a good challenge. So I came home one weekend from that last job, and my dad had passed away, my father-in-law had passed away, and my brother-in-law had passed away, all in like a 9-month period. And I came home over a weekend, and I looked at Al and I said, we have to do better than this. This isn't really good for us. And he agreed. And so I went in and I gave my resignation. And my physician board of directors was really upset. They were like, you can't leave. We'll buy your house in Tucson, da, da, da. And we decided we really wanted to stay in Tucson. So long story short, I came back to Tucson and I really tried hard to find a similar position, and I just couldn't. And my very brilliant husband said, start your own consulting business. And I hemmed and hawed, and that was never a thought I had given at all to. And I started thinking, like I tell my clients, right? Write down pros and cons, your weaknesses, your strengths, where you want to lead this to. And I thought, well, a lot of my background, even though it was general healthcare, a lot of it was in the human resources realm. And so I decided I didn't want to just do HR consulting. And so I veered into this career coaching where, as I said, I've been very lucky. I've gotten most of the jobs I've ever applied for because I'm very good at interviewing and I know what makes up a great resume. And I know you have to practice for interviews and anticipate the questions you're going to be asked. But it's also important to have questions that you're going to ask the interviewer, right? Because it should be that two-way street, because they want to make sure you're a good culture fit, but you want to make sure they're a good culture fit for you as well. So that's what I do with my clients. I prepare resumes that stand out. And that doesn't mean they're in blue or red or pink color. That is actually not the way to stand out positively. It's all about also creating cover letters that stand out and repeat keywords that are in the job posting. And it's about sharing what you're good at and where you're going to help them raise their bar, whatever that looks like. And employers are really looking for where you have contributed, whether it's to the bottom line, whether it's to productivity and efficiency, whether it's culture, but that's what they're looking for. So I help my clients go down those routes specifically, and then we prepare for interviews and we talk about communication, verbal and non-communication. And a lot of times first interviews now are this way on Zoom, and that's a whole different thing, especially when there's 3 or 4 people, right?
Yeah.
Because all they see is from you here and up. So
Right.
it's a challenge and a struggle for people, and particularly college kids who haven't done it before, middle-aged women who are changing careers, or they've finished with their families and they're moving into a new career, or just heading back into the work realm. So that's how I landed where I am.
Got so many things in there that jump out at me. One of the things that jumped out at me was something that we have in common, getting that confidence as a result of somebody else validating our ability for us, like in the beginning, right? Like whether it was getting this great job that gave it to you, whether it was your husband suggesting, why don't you break out on your own? For me, ironically, because breaking out on my own and doing my own business was never in my radar. I come from a long line of, you find a good job, great career, great company, you grow until you retire, right? So it never was on my radar until I went to a career coach, and she helped me. She was the one that suggested it to me. I was just trying to get my next career. And she's like, well, have you ever considered being like a consultant and a coach with all your skills? So similar to like what your husband did for you, right? In terms of suggesting it and making it happen. So that jumped out at me for sure. And then with helping people navigate job interviews, and I totally understand trying to get away from the HR consulting and really just focusing in on helping people. What I'm curious about is you mentioned earlier, you yourself, you would never want to go back to working in a job for somebody else. So does that make it harder or easier to help other people who do? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And no one's asked me that before. So interesting. For me, I think it's a two-edged sword, right? I've been out of corporate now for 7-8 years. However, I'm still very much into the networking. That's how I find some of my clients. That's how I stay in touch with people I've built relationships with. I'm also part of some organizations like Society of Human Resource Management and so forth. So I do stay pretty much on top of things, which is imperative, right, when you're helping coach others. That said, the basics don't change, right? The way we look for a job, whether it used to be in a newspaper, right, and now it's all online. Now computers sort of verify that you've got some of the skill sets that are in the job posting before your resume gets sent up the chain of command to the hiring manager. So things have changed, but the basics of interviewing skills have not changed.
Right.
Right? You have to sell yourself. That's what that interview is all about. And you can't do that if you're not confident. And so for me, like I said, I've very much always landed most jobs I've interviewed for which strikes me strange because I know I've always struggled with self-confidence. And so it's funny to me to think you've landed all these jobs, right? And I think I've been able to do that because the imposter syndrome comes out, right? I land this job and then I'm like, oh, what did they see in me I don't see in myself?
Right.
I can't
Right.
really do this, right? And so you learn to talk back to that voice in your head that says, I'm not good enough, smart enough, strong enough, I'm a woman, right? All of those things. And that's sort of how you start to build that confidence. And like you alluded to as well, part of it's my husband, part of it was this career coach for you. I came out of hiding as a burn survivor during COVID and wrote my story. And at the back of the book, I encourage other burn survivors and basically anyone who reads my book to identify their superpowers. And that helps my clients as well, because when we know what our superpowers are, we're better able to engage with people and share with them our strengths and our weaknesses as to why we're good for that particular job. It also, I serve on the board of 3 nonprofits, and I encourage my clients to do that because it's a great way to gain visibility, to give back to the community, all of that. And so that's another thing. The boards I'm on, we all interview prospective board members. And so again, it's not necessarily your resume we're looking at, but it's why do you want to join our organization? What do you bring to us that's going to make us bigger, better, stronger, more financially sound, more aware of our organization in the community? And so again, those superpowers really come into play. And they can be things like people tell me my smile, right? And which I got from my dad. You walk into a room, you smile, and what do people do? They smile back at you. So it can be something simple like that, or it can be really good listening skills, right? We're all taught to active listen, and that's huge. It can also be more work related, right? You're really good at self-promotion, or you're really good in a team atmosphere or whatever, but we need to learn to identify what those powers are that we have so that we can hone them, and then we can build on the things that we want to make our superpowers.
Great. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the clients that you serve. Is there a particular profile of people that you seem to attract as you're helping with your coaching?
Yeah, so that too is an interesting question, Amy, because I do get that one a lot, and people frame it in, who's your avatar? And I really struggle with that because I don't have a particular avatar. I help college kids. It goes earlier than that. I help 9th and 10th, 11th and 12th graders when they're applying for colleges or
cool.
jobs. I mean, sometimes it's jobs, but more likely it's colleges because these kids, 16, 17, 18, they've never interviewed, right? If they have a summer job, mom and dad got it for them or their neighbor. And to interview, especially if you're on a track team and they're going to have you meet with the coach and, like delve into sororities and all of that. So I help them build their confidence with interviewing. And then it goes to like the next level, which is college juniors and seniors for the same reason. They're looking for their career and it's their first entree into maybe real work life. And so I help them. And then a lot of my clients, more now than ever, are, I'll say, middle-aged women, 40s and 50s, looking to break out of what they've been doing and move into another realm. And a lot, because my background is healthcare, a lot of my clients come to me, they're nurses, they can't lift patients, they don't want to do that anymore. After COVID, I had a lot of respiratory therapists find me, and they were just done after COVID. And so they're like, I don't know what else I can do. And so we delve into what their strengths are, what skill sets they have that are transferable, because most of what we all do is transferable to something else. If we're good at communication, it doesn't matter what or where we're communicating. If we're good with people, we're good with people. If we prefer to work on our own independently, it's great now that we can do that with remote jobs. many, many, many companies are still looking for remote workers. So those are mostly the people that I help. And then I do coach executives. My few executive clients are CEOs, newly moved into those ranks. And I help them mostly because two of them are women. And while they've moved up the ranks, they've not really done strategic planning. They've not really held management meetings. They don't know how to prepare an agenda, which sounds very odd, but they don't. They don't necessarily know how to engage. They know how to say, okay, do X, Y, Z. But what I try to coach them on is you've hired good people. If you haven't, you need to go back and hire good people. But if you hire good people, let them do their job. They're not necessarily going to do it the same way you would. That's why you hired them. Right. And so people really struggle with that, women in particular, because we want to show our strength and we want to show that we're in charge. And, and how do you do that? You do it by being authentic and by asking open-ended questions and getting people's input, which means sometimes we have to be vulnerable, but it also means that by asking people questions, it doesn't mean that we don't know the answers. It means that we're seeking affirmation, we're getting input to make our decisions better, or maybe broader thinking, critical thinking, right? Which we get when we open it up and ask people in our room what they think.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. And I can see the connection on why and how you serve those different audiences. Like with the younger kids, the students, whether it's high school or college, they don't have as much opportunity anymore to really hone the soft skills and the communication skills. So it sounds like with you helping them with interviewing, that would really be key for them. I'm curious with the midlife women in their 40s, 50s that are looking to pivot or get out of the job that they're in. I have a lot of peers in that group. I was in that group until I decided what I was going to do. And I hear a lot of it's hard to even get the interview. Like they're having a hard time dealing with it. It feels like ageism. I mean, it's always hard to say that that's what it is, but it feels that way. When you think back to when you get almost every job you apply for, and then all of a sudden this time around, it's a little harder and slower. Yeah. It can really take a hit on your confidence. I'm curious your thoughts around that. If you have any advice, thoughts, recommendations.
Yeah, definitely. So to your point, ageism is out there, unfortunately. And discrimination is very hard to prove, right? Why did they choose you over me? Yes, you're younger, I'm older, whatever, but you can't prove that. There's no way you can. And so what I encourage my clients to do, as I mentioned before, is identify our superpowers. But also, when we've been in the workforce for a long time, we've created these resumes for 20 years of our experience. And when we look at those resumes, they're out of date. They don't necessarily capture what you have succeeded in, right? You haven't necessarily shown in 3 to 5 bullets per job how you've grown, what your contribution has actually been. I mean, they want to see numbers. And I know my resume, if you looked at it a few years ago, it didn't have any of that. It just said, I was the executive director and I supervised X number of people and I did this, that, and the other thing. And as I look at these, particularly women, but men's resumes as well, it falls into that category.
Right.
We know what we did. And we hope when we get the opportunity to share that, we can elaborate. But unfortunately, if our resume isn't concise and it goes 3 or 4 pages and it's got your name in red at the top or whatever, no one's going to look at that. There are 100 people per job posting, applying for every position generally. So how do you stand out and get on the HR recruiter's desk to get past that to the hiring manager, to get past that to get an interview where you can look at the person in the eye and tell them how you're excited about going to work for XYZ company and be part of their team, right?
Yeah.
You have to sell yourself on paper first.
Right.
And
Right.
so I think the resume template that I've created, and I know it's really helped people land interviews and then jobs.
It sounds like just being strategic about it and intentional about it in your approach. And a lot of times, and it kind of goes back to the confidence piece too, because you sort of need to be in the right mindset to begin with to be able to approach it from that direction, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And my clients and I work a lot on that. The first thing I do if somebody reaches out and says, so I think I need help with my resume, I'm like, send it to me. And I take the time before I meet with them to review it, because that gives me a chance to say, okay, so you said you did XYZ. What did that entail? Who did you do that with? What teams did you work with? Because it's not there. Your bullet is 3 lines long and it doesn't tell me what I need to know. When I'm posting a job that means you're going to be working in a team and you're going to be leading people and whatever it is. So by interviewing you, me and you talking about, yes, you have these skill sets, but how do we get them across in a phrase, not even a sentence, times 3 or 5 maximum per organization that you worked for?
Right. Right. That makes sense.
And so it is, you have to be strategic and you have to identify why you were good at what you did. It's just,
that sounds like it should be easy, right?
Yeah, it's not.
You know,
it's not. And I understand that fully well because I work with these people day in and day out, and it's a challenge because we all, like I referred to before, right? We all have that voice in our head, right? You've been in this position for 5 years. You're not going to go anywhere in this company. You need to look outside. But that voice in your head says, don't leave the comfort of this job. You're doing really well. You don't have the skill set to move up to your boss's level. You don't have the experience. You don't have the education. You're not, whatever that voice is telling you. And we as women in particular need to learn to turn that voice off, which is near impossible. So what I suggest, instead of turning the voice off, is changing the conversation. Talk back to that voice. I once went to a conference, oh my gosh, it's probably 15 or 20 years ago. And I forget the woman who taught one of the breakouts, but she was so smart. She said, name that voice. Call it Gertrude, call it Jimmy, call it pain in the ass, call it whatever you want, but name it. And then when it's talking to you, say, hey, Gertrude, stop that. I am smart enough. Remember that project I led last week? And that, the other thing I tell clients, which I've done my whole career, some mentor along the way taught me, track your successes. Keep your resume up to date, but also keep an Excel spreadsheet of your successes. And that could look a lot of different ways, but it can look like I decreased my budget by X tens of thousands of dollars by implementing a new software project or program. Or I promoted this person on my team because I recognized their skill set and coached them in XYZ. It can look a lot of different ways. The other reason I encourage my clients to do that is because when it comes time to get promoted or simply have your annual review, and sometimes when you're in a new job, it's as early as 3 months, go back to that list of accomplishments, because your boss doesn't likely know everything that you've done. They just know maybe you're doing a great job. And when you can pull that list of accomplishments and share that verbally with someone, it rings home. It's like, wow, I didn't even know you were doing that. You worked with them on that project. I didn't know you were part of that. They got all the credit. You didn't, because you were just this little piece of it. But of course, they couldn't have succeeded without you. And none of us recognize, like, it happens all the time. And as women, guys are really good at self-promoting, right?
Yes.
We as women are not. We need to get better at that. Unfortunately, we're really good at tearing each other down because we're very competitive. We need to stop that and help build each other. Great job, Amy, on that. I'm going to tell so-and-so about how well you just did.
Yes.
Wow, what does that do? That elevates me and you at the same time. And we haven't been coached enough to do that. Guys learn that early on. So, yeah, it's all about sharing our experiences with the next generation, however that looks, and giving them encouragement and pointing them down the right path.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I do see more signs of confidence in the younger generations, which just fills my heart. And I'm hoping that women supporting women and women lifting women expands, because has definitely been a mission throughout my career. I had several key women mentors earlier in my career that helped bring me up, and I've tried to pay it forward every chance I get. And I still see that we haven't come anywhere close to scratching the surface on that. Like, we really need to get better at supporting each other and helping each other. How about for those of your clients, because you mentioned like the nurses because of your healthcare background, and nurses who needed or wanted to do something else, or anybody else who they want to take a completely different path.
Yeah.
That can feel very overwhelming and daunting, because you might feel like you're starting from square one, you're starting from zero. You may feel like you have none of the skills needed.
Exactly.
I don't necessarily believe that, but I'm curious, like, what is your guidance in those types of scenarios?
Yeah. So I have a certification for coaching, and I have a program that I use with my clients to go through that. But some of those exercises include identifying your strengths, identifying what you want. What does that look like? What's your work-life balance objective? What kind of salary are you looking for? What's important to you? What's not important? What are the disadvantages of where you are now? What are the advantages? Like those kinds of things, because they're not yes or no questions. They're all open-ended. They make people think. And there are exercises that my clients go through to identify those things. We also have a long list of different occupations. And so we talk about, okay, you don't want to be in nursing, but what about leadership in healthcare? What about nurse management? Because now you're not moving the patient, you're doing more leadership things. And then we look at what skill sets can we identify that are your strengths, that are transferable. What does it take for you to be a really good nurse? You have to listen. You have to listen. Everybody needs good listeners. So that's transferable, whatever that looks like. Communication. If you're a nurse, you have to be able to communicate with a patient, with a doctor, with other nurses, other team members, why it's important for you to take this medication at this hour in order for that patient to be compliant. So you now have skill sets that enable you to influence. You're an influencer, not an influencer like a social media influencer, but you're able to make somebody do something that they don't necessarily want to do because you've explained to them the benefit and the negative. Right? So those are skill sets you need in every job. And nurses will be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I had that skill. Because they do it every day. They do it every hour of every day. They have patience, patience. You can't be a successful nurse without those kinds of patience. That's a skill set. Everybody doesn't have that. So it's that kind of thing that we get to analyze and focus on, because again, most people don't recognize their own skill sets because they're in the depth of what they do hour by hour, day by day. They don't have an opportunity to look from the outside as I can from a coaching perspective and say, that's a skill set you have. That's some positive aspect of what you do. That is a superpower you have. The other thing that's very, very easy that I do a lot with especially when I'm speaking to groups and I ask them to identify superpowers, people really struggle with that at first because they are like, I don't have any. What where's that coming from? So I tell them to start at the last compliment they received, right? That red dress looks great on you because it picks up your cheeks. That blue is gorgeous because it pulls out the blue in your eyes. Whatever. Great job on that project leading that team. Whatever it was, because we tend, especially again as women, to make light of our successes rather than share our successes. Guys are very good at that. We are not. So as we identify our successes, we build our confidence, which enables us to share our skill sets, and we do better in interviews and in jobs, in our everyday lives with our spouses, our kids, our whatever. I feel like I'm lecturing. Am I lecturing?
No.
I get on my soapbox.
You're passionate about it.
I am. I really
That's
am.
why it's your superpower.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So one of the themes that has come up a lot in our conversation is around confidence and a little bit around fear and connected to feeling like an outsider. And you alluded to it earlier when you talked about being a burn survivor. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Like what inspired you to take those experiences and turn it around and help others who are facing similar feelings and challenges?
It's taken me a very long time to feel comfortable in my own skin. Very long time. I just turned 70 in March. And I will say the last 5 years, you're seeing the new me. I would not have done this 5, 6, 7 years ago. I would have been shaky in my boots and done every excuse. Well, I never would have reached out in the first place. So it never would have gotten to this level. So growing up, so I was burned as a 2.5-year-old toddler. My mom took me to a neighbor's house for a mom and daughter tea. I was 2.5. We came in from outside. The smell of cookies was just amazing, flowing out the screen door from the oven. They put the cookies on the table. They had a fresh pot of coffee and hot chocolate. And I reached for a cookie and I toppled a 40-cup percolator full of fresh coffee off the table and all over me. So I suffered 40% of my body, suffered 4th-degree burns. My parents didn't know if I would live or die. I was in the hospital for a very long time. Fast forward, I became afraid of everyone and everything. So from people, places, things that make sense. So at the time of I was burned in the early 1950s, they treated burns very differently than they do now. Survivors like myself had steroid injections put into their wounds to heal, and they don't do that anymore. But I remember, no one's told me that. I remember as a 3-year-old being tied down to a table and having that done. So I'm definitely afraid of anything having to do with injections, needles, anything like that. And being burned with water still has me frightened of other kinds of potential burns. So it's interesting. My sister and I were talking at a coffee shop, and this woman was sitting next to us with a baby cradled in her arms, and she was balancing her computer, her baby, and a large Starbucks coffee. And my sister and I literally at the same time got up and moved the coffee cup away, like to the middle of the table. And this woman looked at us like, WTF, right?
Right.
And we're like, sorry. And I said, I was burned as a child from hot coffee. I don't want your child. And she was like, she didn't know whether to thank me or slap me. Like she really didn't. But going back to fears and phobias, because I kind of took a side angle there. Fears of height, fears of reptiles, fear of needles, fear of flame. So to this day, I won't light a sparkler. July 4th, I loved, but I won't be anywhere near fireworks or flames or any of that. It took me years to cook on a gas stove. I mean, electric stoves are hot, but they're bright red, right? Until they start to cool down. Gas stoves have the fire, especially in the years earlier, you had to light the pilot light. I never light a match. My parents never
Mm.
had to worry about me smoking. It's yeah, there's a lot of fears and phobias that I have overcome.
Yeah.
One of the ways I did when my husband and I knew we were moving to the desert, I've always had a horrific fear of snakes, and it goes way back to when I was in a camp counselor. So knowing that I was moving to the desert and there are a lot of those creepy crawlers, right, from lizards to rattlesnakes and everything in between, I found a person at State University of Albany, New York, who was doing his PhD dissertation on phobias. He interviewed me. He took me on as a client. It was supposed to be a 6-week course. I'll say 7, 8 months later is when I graduated. I couldn't touch a book with a snake in it. The book would fly, newspaper, any of that. So it took me weeks to touch a golden book with a snake in it. He had rubber snakes. It took me weeks to be able to touch the rubber snake. It took my husband to take me to the car in the garage and touch my car tire made of rubber and then touch a rubber snake to make the comparison that there's no difference, only in the design. So I took what I learned from that experience, which is exposure. The only way you're going to overcome a fear and a phobia is expose yourself to it, which is very hard to do, but over and over and over again. So I could never cross a bridge on a bicycle, walking. I cringed if the car crossed a bridge. And now my husband and I walk across a bridge literally every day. So using the tools this amazing guy gave me all those years ago, that was 26 years ago, I apply that to everything I become fearful of. I tell people I'm not perfect. I still have a long way to go, but I've gained so much ground in overcoming obstacles that I feel I can help others overcome obstacles. And that's why I wrote my book.
What's the name of your book?
So it's called The Accident. It was originally written for kids. I thought it would be mostly pictures and a lot of words, and it's not at all. And so book 2 is now in the process. My editor is going to start editing it in September. My publisher wants it by October, so it can be done by the end of the year. And people are saying, so what's the title and what, why is it different? And I said, it's The Accident on steroids. I leave nothing untouched. I talk about being a teenager, dating for the first time, having scars that are not visible to most people, changing clothes in a dressing room, changing clothes in gym class, talking about overcoming fears and phobias to the next level. And now I'm speaking more than I ever have before because I put it on my vision board and it's coming true. I just spoke to 90 people at a corporate employee lunch, a motivational lunch that they decided to have. And at the end, I asked for questions, and 2 people in the room raised their hands. One, my husband noticed, because he was in the audience, noticed that she was writing the whole time I was speaking. And so when I acknowledged her and asked what her question was, she read, and she was reading from her notes. And she said, I was burned as a toddler. I've never shared my story before. And the tears. Her colleagues had no idea there were people in that room who applauded, hugged her. But she's healing because she shared that story never shared before. That's the reason I tell my story. I heal because by sharing our stories, we heal. But I'm also sharing because when I'm vulnerable, it gives other people the permission to be vulnerable and to share what resonates with them so that they're able to share their story as well.
Wow. That must have just filled your heart to know that your talk made that impact, gave that woman the courage and the confidence to share her story, which then the ripple effect of the impact on her.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Happens every time I speak.
Well, thank you so much for sharing so much of your story. There were so many amazing gold nuggets in there. Not only just I love how you apply what we would normally do for like a phobia, and you apply that to all fears, which ultimately gives you the confidence to get out there and speak and to make those connections. I find that very inspiring, and how you're helping others as they're trying to up-level their professional experience. So thank you so much for joining me and for sharing all of your great experience and wisdom.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you. I really appreciated the opportunity to share my story with you and your audience. And two things I want to share in closing. One is share your smile, because they're the good kind of contagious. And then second thing is, we always think of worst case scenario. In reality, worst case scenario never happens. Never happens. So put your toe in the water and try things you've never tried before. You're stepping out of your comfort zone, and that's how we make progress.
That's a perfect close. Thank you, Gayle.
Thank you, Amy. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Blueprint Breakers podcast. What is your superpower? And a very special thank you to my guest, Gayle Petrillo. You can find Gayle at her website. It's firstimpressions1.com. firstimpressions1.com. And thank you again to the listener for listening and for sharing this episode with your friends. If you haven't yet done so, please go to your podcast platform. Make sure that you are subscribed or following this podcast. And thank you in advance for giving us a 5-star rating. If you have found any value in our podcast, we are now humbly accepting gratuities and donations to help with production costs. You can access the link in our podcast show notes or on my Instagram profile. Have a great week. Keep on breaking those blueprints and rewriting your own.